If you ever thought your home was the safest place on earth, think again. What I'm about to tell you changed everything I believed about love, trust, and family. Before we begin, hit subscribe and tell me in the comments, what would you do if you heard footsteps in your attic when you were supposed to be home alone? When I turned 72, I thought my life had already seen all its storms. My husband Charles was a retired journalist turned novelist, respected and mild-mannered. Our home, an old, ivy-wrapped house on a quiet street in Vermont, was where I planned to spend peaceful days drinking tea, tending to my roses, and rereading the books we'd collected over 40 years. But peace, I've learned, is often just the calm before the truth comes crashing through. That morning, the clouds hung low and gray, promising rain. I'd planned to clean the entire house before the dampness crept into every corner. Just as I started wiping the living room window, my phone buzzed. It was Linda, my childhood friend. Her voice still had that brightness I remembered, and she said she was passing through town and wanted to meet for coffee. I hesitated. The house was a mess, and Charles's study upstairs was due for a good dusting. Then I thought of Claire, the young woman who sometimes helped with cleaning. She was quiet, polite, saving up to finish her college degree. I called her, and she agreed to come right away. "Just don't touch Charles's old shelves," I told her before leaving. "They're fragile." The cafe garden smelled of wet soil and lavender. Linda and I talked about our grown children, her city life, my retirement. For the first time in months, I felt light. Then my phone rang again. Claire. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Mrs. Eleanor," she said. Is someone else in the house?" My heart stilled. "No. Why do you ask?" "There's a woman," she whispered. "On the second floor." The world tilted. "Get out," I said. "Right now. Leave the door open." "I'm calling the police." By the time I reached home, patrol lights were flashing against the rain. Claire sat on the front step, pale and shaking. She couldn't even speak. The officers searched every inch. Attic, basement, closets. Nothing. No broken locks, no open windows. Nothing but dust and the echo of our fear. "She looked real," Claire kept saying, trembling. Long white dress, hair all tangled. She disappeared down the hall. Charles arrived moments later. When I told him, he laughed softly. "It's an old house, Ellie," he said. "Shadows play tricks." I wanted to believe him. I really did. But Claire wasn't the type to imagine things. And that night, long after the police left, I caught Charles looking at the second-floor hallway longer than usual, just standing there, thoughtful, like he knew something I didn't. Months passed. I retired officially, trading deadlines for long, empty mornings. But rest wasn't what I found. It started with sounds. Tiny scratches above the ceiling, like something dragging slowly across the attic floor. Then came the faintest footsteps, deliberate and rhythmic, when the house was supposed to be empty except for us. One night, I told Charles, trying to sound casual. "There's someone in the attic," I said over breakfast. "I hear them walking." He didn't even look up from his paper. "Probably mice," he said. "I'll set traps." The next day, the noises stopped completely. No creaks. No footsteps. Just silence thick enough to make my ears ring. But silence can be worse than noise. It leaves room for your mind to start imagining what it already suspects. That week, something strange happened. I'd bought a spicy Italian sausage, my guilty pleasure, and tucked it neatly in the refrigerator. Charles hated spicy food, always had. The next morning, half was gone. When I asked him, he shrugged. "Felt like trying something new," he said. I stared at him, baffled. For 40 years, he'd refused even a pinch of chili flakes. Now, suddenly, he had a craving? The next day, the sausage was completely gone. I didn't say a word. A few days later, we spent a Saturday visiting friends in a nearby town. We got home near midnight. I went upstairs to wash my face, only to feel something cold and wet under my slippers. The bathroom floor was soaked, water dripping down the shower walls as if someone had just bathed. "Charles," I called out, my voice trembling, "come here." He came, peered inside, and frowned. "Probably the pipes," he muttered. "This house is ancient." "It hasn't rained," I said. "The street's dry." He ignored me, walked out, and went straight to bed. I stayed in the doorway, staring at the mirror, feeling as though someone unseen had just slipped out moments before I entered. One afternoon, I decided to clean Charles's study. It was the one room I rarely touched. He liked things just so. The smell of old paper and tobacco hung heavy in the air. I started organizing his cluttered desk, pushing aside piles of drafts and notebooks. As I lifted a stack of loose pages, a small wooden drawer popped open. Inside lay a leather-bound journal, old and worn, with feminine handwriting filling its pages. Curiosity got the better of me. The handwriting was elegant, soft curves, emotional rhythm. The entries weren't diary notes, but story drafts. Stories about isolation, heartbreak, guilt. And oddly, they sounded familiar, eerily, like the novels Charles had published. Same themes, same imagery. The same phrasing. My throat went dry. Charles never wrote by hand, ever. He typed everything. So who wrote these? A secret collaborator? A fan? Or someone closer? When I heard the garage door open, I quickly tucked the journal back into the drawer. That night, I couldn't sleep. Around 2 a.m., I heard it again, soft creaking, faint steps in the hallway. I sat up. The attic door, barely visible through the shadows, was slightly ajar. I woke Charles. "The attic door is open," I whispered. He sighed, half asleep. "Ellie, please. Go back to bed." But when he walked over to check, the latch was shut tight, as if it had never been touched. He turned to me, voice colder than I'd ever heard. "You're overtired. That's all. You need rest." He guided me back to bed, but I lay there, wide-eyed, listening to the silence press down like a blanket. For the first time in my life, I was afraid not of ghosts, but of the man sleeping beside me. Charles started staying up later, claiming he had to work on a new novel. Every night around 10, he'd kiss my forehead and head to the study. I pretended to sleep. But at 1 in the morning, when I woke to the sound of faint footsteps, I realized the study light was off. I crept down the hall, every board creaking under my bare feet. The door was open, empty. Computer dark. Not a single page disturbed. "Charles?" I whispered. No answer. From the corner of my eye, I saw a faint glow from the stairwell, a shadow moving quietly down from the attic. My heart pounded. I pressed against the wall as Charles descended barefoot, holding a porcelain dinner plate. When he saw me, he froze. The plate slipped from his hands and shattered. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the night. "What were you doing up there?" I asked. He didn't meet my eyes. "Thinking," he said simply. "You wouldn't understand." "Go to bed." That was the moment I stopped trusting him. The next morning, he packed a small suitcase. "I'm going up north for a while," he said. "Need inspiration." He rarely took trips alone, and never without telling me in advance. "Why so sudden?" I asked. He looked at me then, his eyes hard, detached. "While I'm gone," he said slowly, "don't let anyone in, not the neighbors. Not anyone from the paper, especially not Mr. Grant, my editor. If he asks for me, tell him you don't know where I am." Then he left. 2 hours later, the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw Mr. Grant standing there with a young assistant. They looked irritated. "Mrs. Eleanor," he said sharply the moment I opened the door, "where's Charles?" "The manuscript is 2 weeks overdue." I repeated exactly what Charles had told me. "He left this morning," I said softly. "I don't know when he'll be back." Grant laughed bitterly. "That's odd," he said. "Your neighbor told me the attic light is on every night. If he's been working that hard, I'd expect a masterpiece by now." The attic light. My blood ran cold. We hadn't used that space in years. It was filled with old trunks, dust, and broken furniture. There was no reason for any light to be on. I forced a smile, thanked them, and closed the door. Then I stood there, shaking. Everything, the noises, the missing food, the wet bathroom, the handwriting, suddenly pointed to one place: the attic. And I realized, whatever Charles was hiding, it wasn't just a secret. It was a living, breathing truth waiting above my head. That night, I didn't hesitate. I fetched the old ladder from the shed, brushed off the cobwebs, and dragged it up the stairs. My hands trembled as I fit it under the attic hatch. The latch was rusted shut, but I forced it open. A warm, musty air escaped, heavy, human. I lifted my phone's flashlight and climbed. The beam cut through darkness filled with boxes, draped furniture, and old memories. Then, at the far end, I saw it: a small table, a flickering oil lamp, and a woman sitting with her back to me. Thin hair tangled white, a faded dress hanging off her shoulders. She was writing. "Who's there?" I whispered. The pencil froze. Slowly, she turned. Her face hollow, pale, familiar. My knees nearly gave out. It was my sister, Margaret, the sister who'd vanished 30 years ago. I didn't call her name again. My voice felt like it might shatter the air, and if the air broke, maybe she'd vanish the way the cleaning girl said, like a shadow slipping into a wall. But the woman didn't vanish. She blinked, the lamplight wobbling in the glassy surface of her eyes, and I watched a dozen memories sprint toward me and collide all at once. "Margaret?" I whispered. Her lips moved around the shape of my name before any sound came out. "Ellie." My knees buckled. I grabbed the edge of an old trunk to steady myself, heartbeat roaring in my ears. 30 years of not knowing, of calling and writing and begging the police for updates, of holidays set with one empty chair. All of that folded itself into this dark, stifling room beneath the dusty rafters of my own house. She was thinner than I remembered, the soft angles of her 20s chiseled down to bone and shadow. Her hair, once chestnut and glossy, had gone white as spun sugar, tangled at her shoulders. A plain, yellowed dress draped over her like a curtain over a lamp in a room no one used anymore. On the small table before her, an oil lamp, a neat stack of pages, a stub of pencil, beside the table, water bottles, a few cans, a folded blanket. Survival, assembled from scraps. I stepped closer, careful, as if approaching a wild animal. "It's me," I said, because some part of me needed to say it out loud. "I'm here." Her breath shuddered. She tried to stand, but her legs trembled and I was at her side before she could fall. The bones of her wrist were bird-fragile in my palm. That's when I noticed the script on the top page. Not blocky like Charles's typed drafts. Not his tidy print when he signed our Christmas cards. Handwriting curved and lyrical. The same hand from the leather journal I had found in his desk. The same cadence I had loved in his novels. God help me. "Downstairs," I said, because up here felt like a sin. "We're going downstairs." We moved one step at a time, my arm around her waist, her breath catching with each creak of the stair. The air grew cooler as we left the attic, the air of our home, the clean smell of floor polish and old books. I eased her into the living room chair with the softest cushions and hurried to the kitchen. My hands shook as I filled a glass. When I brought it back, she tried to hold it and couldn't. I held the glass for her, tipped it gently, water ran down her chin, and I wiped it away with the cuff of my sleeve. When she'd taken a few sips, I sat on the ottoman across from her and waited. The wall clock ticked. Outside, a car passed and the glass rattled faintly in the pane. A life was happening on the other side of the door. Ours had just cracked open. "Where have you been?" It was the smallest question and the largest one. "In the dark," she said. Her voice had a papery roughness like it had been folded for years. "Ellie, I didn't mean to." She stopped, squeezed her eyes shut. "I never meant for any of it." "We'll take it one piece at a time," I said. "Start at the last night I knew you." She gave a little nod, as if asking her muscles to remember the habit. "I was 21 and stupid," she said. "I was working copy at the paper, and Victor Hale, you remember him, head of features? Asked me to come by his apartment to talk through a special piece he said I'd be perfect for. It sounded like the break I'd prayed for." I went. The name slammed through me. I hadn't heard it in years, not since the first messy weeks after she disappeared, when rumors were as constant as rain. Victor Hale, charmer, drinker, known for getting stories and getting away with everything else. He was drunk, she said. Too drunk. I told him I was leaving. He put himself in the doorway and smiled like a door that thinks it's a wall. He kept talking about the story like it was a joke I wasn't in on. I told him again, clearly, to move. He reached for me, her fingers curled against her dress. I pushed him. He laughed. He pushed back. I grabbed the closest thing, a little marble figure on the side table. You remember that fisherman? It was heavy. I swung. She stared at her hands like they were new. He fell. He hit the edge of the coffee table on the way down. I said his name. I shook him. He didn't wake. The clock ticked. I kept my breath quiet so she could keep going. I panicked. I wanted to call 911. I was already dialing. The door opened. Charles walked in. The room seemed to tip. Charles? She nodded once. He said he was on his way to meet you but wanted to stop and invite me to dinner to celebrate. He'd pitched my story to his old editor friend, said it could be a big break. He saw Victor on the floor and his face changed like someone had blown out a candle behind his eyes. He crossed the room and knelt, then stood and looked at me. He said, "You didn't mean it, but if we call anyone now, they won't care what you meant. They'll take you. You'll lose your life." I could hear Charles saying it, calm, reasonable, protective. The voice that had once soothed me in hospital waiting rooms and bad winters. The voice that had convinced me to trust, over and over again, that he knew best. I said I would turn myself in, she whispered. He said no. He said, think of you. He said you were soft-hearted, that this would break you. He said if I loved you, I would let him fix it. I was 21. I thought he was saving me. I let him. She sank back against the cushion, exhausted. He took the body. He took it in the dark. He told me not to leave by the door, that someone might see. He told me to wait 10 minutes, then he drove me to your house while you were sleeping. He opened the attic and said it was temporary, just a few days until the noise quieted down. I didn't argue. I believed him. My throat burned. A few days, I said, and it came out like a laugh with the breath punched from it. Days turned to months. The paper ran a story. Victor had withdrawn cash. Rumor said we were having an affair. Rumor said we'd run away together. Charles said if the police learned I was alive, no one would believe it was an accident. He told me to stay hidden until it was safe. He brought food. He brought blankets. He brought paper. When I got too quiet, he asked what I was writing. I showed him stories. He smiled. He said I had a gift. He said he wanted to help. He said the world would devour me if I went out now. He said, write it all, Meg. I'll find a way to be your voice. The oil lamp upstairs had been real. This was the motor behind it. A voice trapped in cedar and dust, translated through a man everyone loved. The understanding clicked through me with a terrible, delicate precision, like bones finding their sockets after a dislocation. You wrote his books, I said. Not a question. She pressed her lips together, and in that silence I could see the algebra of the years, the cadence I'd adored, the old-fashioned details and settings that never quite fit the times, the way his characters waited and wrote letters and lived in small rooms instead of feed-scrolling phones and open-plan offices. Charles had told interviewers it was his timeless style. Timeless because time had never moved in the attic. Sometimes I refused, she said. I told him I wanted to turn myself in. He'd go quiet. Then he'd say your name like a soft threat. He'd tell me you were delicate. He'd tell me you'd lose your home, your friends, your faith in everything. He'd tell me I would ruin your life. Her eyes lifted to mine. So I kept writing, Ellie. I kept breathing. Some days, those were the same thing. Some nights, I stood at the attic window and watched the snow cover the street, and I tried to imagine what you were doing in the room below me. I learned the way your footsteps sounded, and the way you sighed when you were tired, and the way you hummed when you folded laundry. I watched my own life in silences. There are cries you make quietly so the people you love can keep sleeping. I made one of those then. It tasted like dust and 30 years. I found your journal in his desk, I said. I didn't know what to think, but I knew it wasn't his hand. She nodded. He kept a few as trophies, I think. Or insurance. I don't know. She glanced at the pages on the table again, then back to me. I can't do it anymore. Something unfurled in my chest that felt like a blade and a bandage at once. Then we won't, I said. You are not going back up there. You're not hiding another minute. We're going to the police. She flinched. I'll be arrested. I'll be with you. I heard how it sounded so simple and impossible. We'll find a lawyer. We'll tell the truth. We'll tell all of it. You defended yourself against a man who meant harm. You were a child, and he was a predator. You were locked upstairs for 30 years by a man who told himself he was protecting us. We'll tell them. And if the law has any breath of mercy, it will find you. She stared at me the way a person staring down from a rooftop wonders if the ground will keep its promise. Okay, she said finally. Tomorrow, she swallowed. I need one night to breathe, not in a ceiling. I made soup. I cut the bread thin and buttered it thick the way our mother did when a day had been bad. We spoke in small sentences about small memories. The summer we broke an entire crate of peaches and ate our way out of the evidence. The time we got caught under a sudden rain and walked home barefoot with our sandals in our hands, laughing like thieves who'd chosen poor weather for their crime. She ate slowly, carefully, the way you learn to when food has been rationed by fear. I let her shower as long as she wanted, 15 minutes, 20, until the mirror fogged and the warm air smelled like the rosemary soap I kept for guests. I left a fresh nightgown on the bathroom counter. When she came out, her hair combed and damp, she looked 10 years younger and 50 years older all at once. I made up the downstairs guest room because I couldn't bear the thought of her under that roofline again. I put a glass of water on the nightstand and an extra quilt at the foot of the bed. When I turned down the light, I put my hand on her forehead, the way I used to when she was sick as a girl. I'm here, I said. In the middle of the night, I went to the hallway and looked up at the ceiling where the attic door sat, closed tight. I put my palm against the paint, as if I could take heat from what was above and send it somewhere it could do good. I stood there for a long time, the house quiet, the clock down the hall ticking, and I practiced breathing for both of us. By morning, I had a plan. I made coffee for me and weak tea for her, spread peanut butter on toast, found a soft sweater that would fit her frame, jeans cinched with a belt. Every motion felt like building a raft out of old boards, hasty, necessary, a little miraculous. When she was dressed, I led her to the car. The sky was a pale sheet, the sun a small coin behind it. As we drove, she pressed her hand to the passenger window and watched the motion like it was a movie she'd dreamt of seeing. Everything looks the same and different, she said, wonder and grief braided. The cars. The signs. People looking down at little glass mirrors in their hands. Noise everywhere. I forgot noise could be a relief. In the attic, the quiet is a noise. I'm sorry, I said, which was too small for the task. At the station, the desk officer asked how he could help. I need to speak to whoever handles cold cases, I said, and when he raised a sensible brow, I leaned in and said my sister's name, first and last. He stopped typing. The cursor blinked. He picked up the phone. We were shown into a small room with gray walls and a table that had known 1,000 knuckles. Detective Armitage introduced himself and his partner, a young woman with quick, listening eyes. I told them I had found my sister in my attic after 30 years. I told them we were ready to explain. They didn't interrupt. That was the first kindness. Margaret's hands shook at first, but as she told it, Victor's apartment, the statue, the fall, Charles's entrance, the burial, the attic, her voice steadied. Maybe confession wakes up old muscles too. When she finished, the room held its breath with us for a beat. Then Armitage nodded once and stood. Thank you, he said simply, which made me want to cry again. He sent officers to our home with me to secure the attic, collect the journals, the pages, the lamp, the cans, the blanket. He sent another team to the wooded hills behind the old quarry where Margaret said Charles had driven that night. She remembered the switchbacks, the view of the reservoir, the broken fence along a turnout, the smell of wet loam when they stopped. When we returned to the house, I watched strangers climb the ladder I had climbed, watched them bring down the quiet evidence of a life, a pencil cup, the stack of pages, the clearest proof, the cramped, perfect hand on the lines that formed the chapters I had once read aloud to book club with pride. They laid everything out on our dining table atop brown paper. The young partner took photographs and noted details in tidy print. "Mrs. Whitaker," she said, my married name, and somehow it sounded foreign now. "Where is your husband?" "Gone north," I said. "He left yesterday. He told me not to let anyone in. He told me to tell his editor I didn't know where he was." She and Armitage exchanged a glance. By late afternoon, the search team near the quarry called in. They had found disturbed soil near the stump of a lightning-blasted pine. They'd begun to clear it carefully. Human remains. A ring, the kind Victor wore. Blue stone, ridiculous. I'd once joked he wore it to make his hand feel important. A wallet I wished had dissolved. Part of a marble fisherman, discolored and broken in a way that made me dizzy. Back at the station, they took Margaret's statement formally. She didn't ask for a lawyer. She insisted on putting every piece on record. I did ask for one on her behalf, a woman from a firm known for taking battered women cases and prisons rights work. When she arrived, she shook Margaret's hand like she would have any clients, not like she was shaking a ghost. "You did the right thing coming in," the lawyer said to both of us. "The truth may be heavy, but it walks forward." Margaret's eyes filled. "I don't know how to walk in light," she said. "But I'll try." They moved slowly, properly. There are ways the state must proceed even when the heart wants to run. Evidence logged. Prosecutor informed. Warrant sought. I was home, sitting at the edge of the couch where Margaret had fallen asleep the previous night, when the squad car rolled quietly to a stop at our curb. The officers took their time walking up the path, eyes on the windows. Another car idled at the end of the block. Our neighbor, Mr. Purcell, stood in his yard pretending to unwind the hose that he'd never once wound in the 3 decades I'd known him. I heard the front gate. The latch's old scrape sounded like a violin string being tuned too tight. The door opened, Charles's key unchanged by any of it, and he stepped into the foyer, suitcase in hand. He looked tired, he looked ordinary. He looked like my husband. He set the suitcase down and called my name the way he always did when he wanted me to bring him the day's grace. Then he turned and saw the officers. There are 1,000 kinds of surprise. The one that crossed his face was small and resigned, like a man remembering he'd left bread in the oven and, of course, it had burned. He didn't ask why. He didn't reach for my hands. He didn't try to run. He put his palms out by habit. He'd stood, I realized then, with a kind of nausea, in rooms like this before, smoothing other people's panic, teaching them how to surrender in tidy steps. He sank onto the bottom stair as they read the charges: obstruction of justice, abuse of a corpse, kidnapping by restraint and concealment, coercion. They did not yet speak of theft of a life's work. That was the kind of theft we save for slower rooms with different kinds of clocks. He looked at me once. Not pleading, not apologizing. I wish I could say I saw shame. What I saw was calculation running out of road. It hit me then. Not like an epiphany, but like a door finally swinging all the way open, that the worst thing he'd done might not have been the first sin, but the thousands of small ones after. Every time he set a plate quietly at the bottom of the attic stairs, every time he carried pages down the ladder, every time he put his name where hers should have been and told himself it was mercy. A man can build a gallows one nail at a time and call it carpentry. As they led him out, Mr. Purcell's hose lay on the lawn, uncoiled, water making a dark river down the sidewalk. The neighbor's curtains fluttered like surprised eyelashes. The sky finally decided to rain. It began with a soft patter on the porch roof and found its rhythm. After the cars had gone, the house breathed. A long, shuddering exhale that lifted dust from the stair treads and set it floating in the foyer light. I stood very still. The living room clock marked the moment like a witness who doesn't know what else to do. I went to the guest room. Margaret was awake, sitting up, hands wrapped around the water glass like it was a candle in a dark church. "I heard the door," she said. "They arrested him," I said. The words felt like stones I could finally set down. She nodded, eyes on the glass. "I thought I would feel something snapping. I don't. I feel like I've been holding a heavy box too long and someone finally took it, and now my arms don't know how to hang." "We'll teach them," I said. "We'll teach everything how to be again." She looked at me then in a way that saw my years and my stubbornness and the new wild edge in my voice that hadn't been there yesterday. "You're different," she said softly. "Truth makes a person feral," I said. "It takes your manners first." We sat a long time without speaking, listening to the rain find all the old leaks and the gutters complain like they were telling a story of their own. When the phone rang, I jumped. It was Detective Armitage. "Preliminary ID aligns," he said. "We'll have to wait for formal confirmation, but it looks like your sister's account matches what we found." "Thank you," I said, which wasn't the right phrase but was the one we give each other when there is no other currency. After I hung up, I walked to Charles's study. I opened the drawer where I'd hidden the leather journal and took it out. I set it at the center of his desk. The lamp made a warm oval over the script. I ran my finger beneath a sentence and felt the tug in my chest. I'd felt 100 times reading his work. The beauty hadn't changed. It was the attribution that had been wrong. It struck me that the truth is like that. The sentence is the same, but whose mouth it comes from tells you whether to kneel in gratitude or step back in fear. Margaret came to the doorway. She was barefoot, the two big jeans cuffed above her ankles. For the first time since the attic, she smiled. Not joy exactly, but the exact shape of a breath finally going all the way in. She looked at the desk, she looked at me. "I wrote a book about me," she said, shy like a child showing a crayon sketch. I hid it in a wooden box under the table upstairs. It's not about characters. It's about my life. I needed to write a life where I wasn't a ghost. "We'll find it," I said. "We'll bring it down. We'll put your name on it." "Your name, no one else's." She nodded and something unclenched in her jaw. "I want to tell them everything," she said. "I want to tell a judge that I killed a man who would have hurt me and that I let another man turn my life into a cupboard. I want to ask if 30 years in the dark counts as time served. And then I want to see my name on a spine in a window." "You will," I said, though the path ahead flickered between clear and terrible. "We'll work until it's true." Night came early, the way it does when a storm is stubborn. I made tea and brought blankets, and we sat on the living room floor like girls at a sleepover, the TV murmuring low with people whose lives were simple and laugh-tracked. Every so often, Margaret would ask what something meant, streaming, trending, a For You page, and I would try to explain in old people, words that felt like trying to praise a flat screen to someone who'd lived their whole life watching flames on a cave wall. We laughed anyway because laughter is the rope you throw each other between strange roofs. Sometime after 10, my phone buzzed. A text from the young partner, "We'll need you both again tomorrow. There will be press. Be careful, drink water. Eat." Eat is a word I hadn't thought of as a command since motherhood. Now it felt like instruction for combat. I went to the kitchen. I cut an apple into careful slices, paired it with cheddar, the good one I always saved for company. Company, I thought, and snorted. The word was brittle and wrong now. I brought the plate back. Margaret took a slice and closed her eyes around the first bite, like the crunch was a song she'd missed. When she finished, she set the slice down and said, "Soft. If I go to prison, will you come on visiting days?" "Yes," I said, quicker than breath. "Everyone." "And if I don't," she said, and stopped, as if the word she wanted were a door that might be locked. "If I can't, she shook her head. "Never mind. I'm tired. The attic teaches you how to hear the worst." "We are not in the attic anymore," I said. We are not learning those lessons anymore. We'll learn new ones. Like how to sleep without listening for a step. Like how to wake up without asking permission from a fear. She lay back and stared at the ceiling for a long time. I watched her chest rise and fall, small and steady. After a while, her breathing deepened. I turned down the lamp and sat in the chair by the window so if she woke, she would see me and know she wasn't alone. Outside, the street shone black with rain. The neighbor's attic window, the one Mr. Grant said glowed late at night, was dark now. Our own attic was dark too. The house had two hearts again, and both were beating where people could see them. I didn't sleep. I watched the night do what night always does, keep its promises to the morning. When the first light threaded into the room, I stood, stretched the stiffness from my back, and went to put on coffee. We had told the truth. The world had begun to move. That was all that had happened and everything. What remained? What the law would do with a life measured in pages and silence, what the press would do with our grief, what mercy would do with our names, stood at the door like weather I could smell but not yet see. And somewhere across town, in a cell painted a bureaucrat's idea of calming, my husband, the man who had read vows into my mouth and helped me into coats and taught me to love the clink of ice in evening glasses, was counting the seconds like a writer searching for a chapter break. I poured a cup for Margaret and a cup for me, and I waited for the sound of her feet, new, hesitant, but on a floor that would hold. The following week passed like a fever dream. Reporters waited at the end of the driveway, microphones angled like bayonets. Headlines called it "The Ghost in the Attic Case." They said my husband, the acclaimed novelist Charles Whitaker, had been hiding a woman in his home for decades. They said the woman was my sister. Every word was true and still somehow not enough. Margaret was kept under observation at the hospital first, thin as a branch and trembling under the sudden light of the world. The doctors said she was malnourished but stable. She'll need counseling, they told me gently, as if I needed to be told that someone who had lived in an attic for 30 years might need help learning to live again. I visited her every day. We sat by the window with cups of mint tea, the kind she used to love. Sometimes she'd just stare outside, watching cars, dogs, clouds, and I'd let her. The silence between us felt different now, not the heavy kind that hides something, but the kind that lets something breathe. Meanwhile, the case exploded. The police dug through the files Charles had kept locked behind his study door. They found hundreds of printed manuscripts labeled with his name but written in her hand. Contracts, royalty checks, movie deals, all under him. His entire career was a castle built from her stolen bones. I was called in to testify. The courtroom smelled of varnished wood and too many eyes. Charles sat at the defendant's table in a plain gray suit, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. When the judge asked if I wished to make a statement, I stood, hands shaking, and said, "He didn't just imprison my sister, he imprisoned the truth." Charles never looked up. He pled guilty. The sentence, 25 years, barely seemed to scrape the surface. But for me, justice was never about numbers. Justice was seeing the world finally speak her name out loud. After the trial, I went home to the house that had once been my pride. Every step echoed differently. The floors creaked like they were trying to apologize. I went up to the attic one last time. The smell of old dust and paper still clung to the air. The lamp she'd used was gone now, taken as evidence, but her spirit lingered there. On the floor under the table, I found what she'd told me about, an old wooden box sealed with brittle tape. I opened it carefully. Inside were pages, hundreds of them, written in that graceful, looping hand. The first line read, "I write to remember who I am." I read until my eyes blurred. The story began in a small town, with two sisters who dreamed of different lives, one of adventure, one of peace. It ended with forgiveness, but not the easy kind. The kind that hurts, like surgery. That night, I couldn't sleep. I called her nurse the next morning to tell her I'd bring the manuscript for her to see. The nurse's pause told me before her words did. "Mrs. Whitaker, I'm so sorry." She She passed in the night. The world went silent. I drove to the hospital anyway because I didn't know what else to do. They gave me a small envelope addressed in her handwriting, "Ellie, don't mourn too long." I finally walked outside, even if it's only in spirit. Publish the book. Call it my last letter to the world. Maybe someone will read it and remember me not as a ghost, but as a writer who once loved sunlight. I held the letter to my heart and cried until there was nothing left but breath. Months later, the manuscript titled "The Woman Upstairs" was published under her real name, Margaret Hale. The first print run sold out in 2 days. Reviewers called it a haunting masterpiece, a triumph of endurance, a love letter to freedom. I sat in the back of the bookstore during the launch event, watching readers hold her story in their hands. A young woman approached the podium, tears in her eyes, and said, "This book made me call my sister again." That was when I knew we had done what we were meant to do. Her words now live in every library that once displayed his. Her name is on every spine where his once stood. The royalties fund scholarships for women writers who were told to be quiet. I turned the attic into a reading room, bright curtains, soft rugs, sunlight streaming through the cleaned window. Her books line the shelves. Every morning I open the window wide and I swear I can feel her in the warmth that fills the space. Sometimes I sit there and talk to her. I tell her about the readers who write letters saying her story changed them. I tell her about the seasons, the flowers, the children walking home from school. And I tell her that forgiveness isn't forgetting, it's letting go of the grip that pain has on your throat. One afternoon, I found a journalist waiting at the gate. She asked, "Mrs. Whitaker, do you hate your husband?" I thought for a long moment before I answered. "No," I said. Hate would mean he still owns a part of me. He doesn't. I loved a man who no longer exists. The truth buried him the same way he buried everything else. I closed the gate behind me, walked back up the steps, and left her there with her questions. Life has quieted now. Some mornings I sit on the porch and watch the sunrise while reading Margaret's words, "No wall can silence a heart that still wants to be heard." The line always makes me cry, but not from sadness, because it's true. I've learned that revenge doesn't always come with fire or blood. Sometimes revenge is peace. It's publishing the truth. It's taking back a name that was stolen and engraving it where the world can never erase it again. I'm old now, and I know my time is shorter than it used to be. But every day that I can still open that attic window, still feel sunlight on my skin, still say her name aloud without fear, that's victory. If you're hearing this, wherever you are, remember this. The truth may be buried, but it doesn't die. It waits. And when it finally rises, it brings the light with it. If this story touched you, give it a like and subscribe for more real-life revenge stories that prove it's never too late to stand up for yourself. Tell me in the comments, if you discovered the person you loved was hiding the darkest truth, would you forgive or would you walk away? Your answer might become the next story.